Welcome back to the Launch Party podcast, where we are lifting off into stratospheric success and we want to take you guys along for the ride. We've got quite an episode today, making up ground, recorded one last night. We're doing another one tonight.
Yep.
Got to make up for that little break we took and got another guest on here. Haven't had a guest on in 2 episodes now, so it's nice to have one back. This time we got one right here with me in the flesh instead of over the internet type of thing. And yeah, this is Brian. I'll introduce him in a sec. But Danny, how's it been these past 24 hours?
Yeah, it's great to have someone in the studio on this fine Tuesday.
What's up, brother?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I've been grinding the CPA testing or studying, and I'm trying to look at it in a new way. Instead of I need to study all this material, I'm thinking about the amount of time I need to put in to get the desired outcome. So it's kind of like if you've ever been on a road trip and you're like going to Florida, it's like 400 miles. Instead of thinking about how many miles you need to go, you can just comprehend it as how many hours do I need to take, and then just take it 1 hour at a time. So I'm just saying, hey, if I put 6 hours a day, 1 hour at a time into studying, hopefully I get that desired outcome in the end. But that's how I'm kind of conceptualizing it now. But that's what I've been up to.
It's a good way to put it. We could relate that into a lot of things, even with what we do in sales. So Brian sells solar with me.
You don't need to get the sales. You just need to hit a certain amount of houses, and then you're due to hit a certain number of sales.
Yeah, and that certain number of houses takes a certain number of time, right? So it's always an equation. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Brian, thanks for coming on. How's it going? And I guess first thing I'll ask you is just what made you wanna hop on and share your story?
Well, I gotta say, the biggest reason I want to hop on is because I think this is one of the coolest podcast names I've ever heard in my life. I think people judge a podcast big on their name. That's going to determine at least 50% whether it hits or misses. And when you said Launch Party Podcast, I'm like, have I heard of that before? Is that some mainstream podcast? Me and my buddy have this show, and I'm like, that is perfect. So who came up with that? How did that kind of go? I guess
it was Danny. That coming up with the name for this was quite a process.
It took weeks,
weeks.
Because we had a few finalists, and then we literally spun a wheel.
Yeah,
and it landed on Launch Party.
And it was Esteban was like, I want to do this one by 9:30. We're deciding. That's it. And then 9:30 comes around. I'm like, dude, just give me a couple more minutes. I'm cooking. And then 9:35, I get Launch Party Podcast. And then we spin the wheel, and then it hits Launch Party Podcast.
That's beautiful. It's slightly better. I guess technically this would be the second podcast I've ever done. It's slightly better than we did one episode for some of my best friends freshman year of college in their student apartment. And talking this is an actual setup, and we had the name of the podcast written on line paper, taped to the wall. We had an iPhone 12 recording from 5 feet away. This is the iPhone audio. This is a slightly better setup, I'd say. So it's
okay.
Excited.
Yeah, well, we're trying. We're upgrading slowly but surely. We'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, let's get into it, Brian. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We always love having guests, and we just we want to hear other people's story and then try to see what wisdom and what knowledge we can gain from other people's experiences, and really just listen and have a good conversation. So, I mean, let's get into it. Where are you from? How was growing up stuff like that? How were you raised?
That's a great question. Lot to unpack there. I'm from a couple different places by now. I've lived in a couple different areas. Originally, I was born and raised mostly around Philly, so Southeast PA. If you know the area, I could specify, but I'll just say Philly to keep it simple. Grew up there, spent the first 13, 14 years, I guess. I moved here to South Carolina right before high school. Did high school there and a year of college. And then, there's plenty to go through there since. But, growing up, I mean, great family, different schools. It's interesting people I think sometimes that, there's a lot you can take from even people think they have maybe, more boring lives. But there's a lot people can always take from kind of the early years, I believe.
Yeah. Did you do any sports or have to work any certain jobs that had, you would say, an influence on your maturation, your growth and development?
Yeah, 100%. I grew up kind of playing baseball. Kind of took out from my
Nice.
dad. He played in college.
Yeah.
It's one thing that I wish I would have continued. To be completely honest, don't have many
Same.
regrets, but I wish I would have kept playing baseball. I think
Yeah.
that was my best sport. And yeah, with the jobs, I think every job I've really ever had has always been like very communication focused, very customer like service focused in a way with people. To the point where my first job, I worked at a golf course in Myrtle Beach at the time, and
Nice.
that really kickstarted, really planted a big foundation for like everything I do now. So I'm very grateful for that.
Nice. So we've got a couple guests now. Was it 3? I think it's our third.
Yeah,
golf,
we're always talking about golf.
You're thinking you're being original. You know,
yeah, get out of here.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, I knew a lot of friends growing up that worked in golf courses. I played golf growing up, and I didn't work at a golf course. I wish I did. I've heard it's a super cool experience. And especially if you're like 12, 13 years old and you're making good tip money, you could definitely make some nice cash.
Yeah.
So with you said you played baseball. You said you had a couple jobs growing up. What were a couple of those first little jobs, or maybe was it like, did you do like your own little business or like work for a family member or anything like that?
That's one thing. I wish I had some cool story about like, you know, the 7-year-old entrepreneur, but truthfully, I don't.
Oh, dang.
I'd say I've always, I guess, thought differently, if that makes sense. Like in terms of like that mindset, like going through school. Couldn't tell you exactly where it started, but I can remember like being in middle school, and maybe, you know, schools in different areas are different, but at least where I grew up there, they're very heavy on like making you think about like your future. And like, I remember very specifically, I had this math teacher. This was in 7th grade, and I couldn't remember all the details, but one day in class, he was saying like, you know, oh, who wants to get into psychology, or who wants to get in this and that? And I'm like, dude, like I have like 2 hairs on my nuts. You want me to think about like psychology? Like, this is great. You know what I mean? Like, I guess it's good in a sense, but I always felt that like I never had like a clear, like defined way early on. So I kind of picked up like through those jobs, through different experiences, like my own path, if that kind of makes some sense. So.
Yeah, definitely. You said you moved when you were like 13, so that's kind of older. You know, you already have a friend group and a social life. How was that transition to basically moving to a new high school in a whole new place?
Yeah, it was pretty different. Definitely at the time, it was I can look back and say it was easy now, but it was a big change. I mean, moving from, you know, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina. Fortunately, I've, you know, been kind of visiting that area for a lot of my life. So I kind of was at least familiar with the area. But yeah, I mean, it's different for anybody, especially at that age, kind of like picking up a new place, new people, and having to kind of adopt that way. But really, I don't know where I'd be if I wasn't there at that time. So just kind of make.
What was your reaction in the moment when you first made that move? Like being a little kid, like I know some kids were like, oh, well, you know, it's nice, we're going down, because I mean, you went from Pennsylvania to Myrtle Beach. Like, were you excited for the beach, or was it like, oh, I'm leaving all my friends and this sucks?
Probably a mixture of both. I'd say honestly, initially I was pretty like thinking of ways I could stay, like trying to finesse it, like, could I go to a different school, or could I crash with these friends, or could I do this and that? But it was all like pretty pointless. I mean, it was the right decision to make, and it's one of those things where like time gives you a lot of perspective, and how like certain decisions like that, like whether it's moving or something else, like, you know, you might think of it a certain way at the time, but it's really like the best thing, and it's, you know, going to work out. You make your own future, so it's like, you know, wherever you are, like it's on you. You'll figure it out.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. My biggest move, I think I kind of moved schools a lot, but my biggest was after 8th grade, I went to Dunwoody High School from a private school for a few reasons. One of them was me and my friend group there. We thought we were just too cool for private school, and that private school is so lame, and public school would be so much more exciting and crazy and fun or whatever. In hindsight, to some extent, kind of, but that's kind of not the case either. That was a big move for me, just starting new, not really knowing anybody. And especially with the way people thought, the diversity in terms of thought, and especially with the teachers. So like at private school, everyone's Christian, usually conservative, and we don't really get political at all. It's all kind of just in a bubble. Everyone thinks very similar. And then public school, and Esteban can attest to this, was really what opened my eyes to how polarized different ways of thought, especially it comes out politically and even in schools. You know, me and Esteban would argue with the debate with the teacher and some of the other students about um, like kneeling in the national anthem and then Donald Trump and
Hmm.
and I remember one history teacher talking about how he prays or like how prayer is bad and he doesn't pray, he just gives thanks, but he doesn't pray because God's stupid and it's just a spaghetti monster in the sky, and then
Yeah.
kind of rebuting some of those ideas. But I think, and I don't really know if I would have been a different person had I stayed in private school,
Yeah.
or if that experience to these diverse ideas kind of helped me grow and develop and make up my own mind about the world and have my own ideas. But it's kind of interesting to think about that.
That's super interesting you say that. I'm glad you said that, Danny, because I can kind of relate. Because I'd gone to a private school like through, I think
Mm-hmm.
it was fifth grade. It's very small, like you're saying, like very
Yeah.
small, like Christian school. And going from that to straight middle school, arguably like the
Mm-hmm.
craziest, weirdest, like, era. It's like,
Mhm.
that was big for me. But I'm curious your both takes on this because I've thought about that myself, that exact thing, like thankful for that experience. I've often thought like, if and when I had kids, like I'd want them to be in public school. I think
Mm.
most people should, because like you're exactly saying, like you have to experience like not only perspectives but people, like dealing with like this entire range. So like, what do you guys think? I mean, is it necessary, or like, could you learn
Um,
that in other ways?
yeah, it's pretty complicated. So, I mean, number one, if you're in a bad public school area, you got to send your kids to private school if you have the
Yeah.
funds. Number two, sometimes in kids in private schools, they come out into college and they just burst out of that bubble and do a whole bunch of crazy things for 2 years because they've never had that freedom or that sense of responsibility because everyone's just kind of encapsulated. Um, when I was going through that, I did want to send my kids to both public and private if I had the choice so that they can get those diverse ideas. But now I think, I don't know, I think either a private school that's a really good community because, see, like, why do people go to Harvard, which is a very hard to get into private upper education institution? It's
Networking.
because the people that you meet there, and they're just on a higher caliber usually. I mean, times are changing, but that's kind of the idea. It's really the people you meet and how you grow and develop with them instead of kind of, I don't know if this is the right word, but like lower caliber people. Um, so you gotta take all that into consideration.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of it comes down to not just the decision you make, but why you're making that decision. And then that's going to
Mm,
translate into how you raise your kids. Because a lot of parents do put their children into private school just to make sure that they're only hearing the good stuff, that every idea that comes through their mind is squeaky clean. They come home, they're not allowed to go out, whatever. They're very strict bedtime, very strict helicopter type of parenting.
mm,
And then I think that ultimately it's the parenting style that leads them to
yeah.
then go to a big college, or go to college, go to the University of Georgia or University of South Carolina, and just go absolutely insane. um, but there are also a lot of parents who put their kids in private school just for reasons that don't necessarily have to do with just making sure that they live their lives, that they live their lives in bubble wrap. So I think, me
Yeah.
personally, the way I would answer that question obviously varies. I mean, I've
It
talked
just
about this a lot
depends.
before. I'm not going to most likely be sending my kids to school in the United States. I hope to not be in the
Yeah.
United States. So in most of the countries that I have on my radar,
You
private
yeah.
school is about the only option. Not only is it a lot more affordable, but the private school industry, for lack of a better word, is a lot bigger, and you have more options
Mhm.
there. And then the
Mhm.
public schools just aren't great.
Mhm.
Uh, but however, if I were to be doing it here, and let's just say I had a kid right now, I think, I mean, yeah, it's a tough question. All it kind of depends on the area, but I do like what you mentioned about potentially giving them both those experiences,
Mhm.
and giving them the diversity that comes with the public school, especially if you live in a diverse part of the country, but then also kind of like that networking type of experience with private school. But I think, to be honest, a lot of I have heard this From a lot of people, like a lot of my customers and people that I might work with will talk about this kind of stuff. Oh, how's your kids? Where you send them to school? I think some people overthink this a little too much. Maybe that's just me, but ultimately, there's only so much control that you can have as a parent in terms of who's going to sit next to your kid at lunch, who's going to be the teacher that's assigned to them, what are they going to want to talk about. And to some extent, you do have to just let things play out as they may, and then do the best that you can at home. So obviously, like, you gotta have your priorities straight there. But obviously, when the time comes for us to make that decision, you bet we're going to be pretty thorough about it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a huge proponent of freedom of speech, and a big part of that is listening, or at least allowing people who you disagree with to speak. And that's good, so that you know that you can combat them with your ideas and then hopefully find a middle ground, or confirm one way is right and one way is not so right. And you got to know your enemy more than yourself, or just as much as yourself, in order to really be able to have a strong stance in something. So that's kind of why it is good to have those diverse ideas in terms of
Mm-hmm.
your growth and development. But yeah, I mean, it just depends, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my answer.
Yeah, for me personally, I didn't have that experience that you guys did, where you change school systems or change
Mm-hmm.
places. Like, I started in the one place and I went all the way up the line up until graduation. So, I think back at it and I think, oh, maybe it would have been cool if I saw, different areas, different places.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, I mean, is what it is. When you're 10 years old, you don't have much say in terms of where you live anyways.
Yeah.
It's true.
So, Brian, so you make it through school. What was like
College.
the end of high school, graduating high school,
Mm-hmm.
your late teenage years,
Mm-hmm.
going into college? What was that like?
Yeah. Well, going into college is funny because I was kind of briefly mentioned earlier, like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a super clear idea what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, by the time I decided to go to college, it was quite literally like 3 months before the semester started. I mean, it was late. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I maybe had some options in where I wanted to go, but at the same time, I guess I also had the idea of not getting into debt or not this or that, to the point where I ended up going to a 2-year school, essentially for free. I guess there's like certain grants or whatever that I had earned, but so I decided to go there, close to 3 months before the semester started, and because I did, I think everything kind of stems from that, and it's kind of crazy how little.
What was your like, I guess, degree of choice when you applied?
My degree?
Yeah.
Business. So
Okay.
I knew, I was very like business like focused, but where that would go, I
Okay.
didn't know until now, but that was just
How would you guess your 17-year-old self would answer that question? Like, what do you want to do?
Oh, dude, he would have no idea.
Okay.
No idea. His brain would be fried. You ask him that question.
Okay.
He'd be cooked. But yeah, I mean, truthfully, I mean, still figuring it out. I mean, I got a path, but I mean, you always want to be adaptive. So, and I think that's a trait that's very strong that most people can kind of have if they can develop it,
Yeah. So what did you do in college? What did your day-to-day look like? Did you have any fun? What was going on at that time?
Yeah, freshman year of college was a different era. I mean, it was 1 year, but when I think back on it, I feel like it's a long time, but it's really only a year. Oh, yeah. And I guess I'm blessed to say I had somewhat of a college experience, even though I did end up dropping out. That little town, little group of friends that I created were like just some of the funniest, most like heartfelt just memories and moments I have that really, really stick with me even now. So it was a 2-year school. It was a tech school. So I mean, I actually technically still lit from home at the time. I had classes Tuesday and Thursday. My first class I had 8 a.m. So I leave at 7:30 in the morning. Like just felt like high school again. Driving up there. Had 4 classes. But it came to a point where like I basically just lived there on the weekends. So like it was like after Thursday, I wouldn't be home until Sunday night. It's just one of those things. But looking back, it was a great year. I'm very thankful for it.
All right. So then why'd you drop out? What'd you have going on?
Yeah. So it all stems from kind of not deciding. It's funny thing is I didn't even like drop out. I just kind of didn't go back. Which is, I don't know if I can say I'm a dropout, but I don't know if that's worse or better. But so what led up to that decision was I had business class first semester, 8 a.m. business class. Never forget it. And I remember I ended up, talking to these two guys in my business class, ended up being real close with them, who are some of my best friends now. And one day after class, I was talking to one of them, and he's like, "Do you want a job?" Talking to me. And I said, "Well, I'm already working like technically like 2.5 jobs right now, literally." I was like, what's up? I'm open to hearing about it. He said, "I made $6,000 last week." So I'm like, okay, like, what's that all about? Oh no, it's just this, like, I don't know, this solar thing. I don't know, just like talk to people and like sell solar. It's just whatever. It's whatever. I'm like, okay, like, I'm about it. $6,000 in a week, like, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Ends up connecting with a couple people. Ended up meeting this kind of core group. We were supposed to create this, like, I guess, office there at the time, and start doing it, which Esteban can speak on as well, like kind of the whole solar industry and getting that started. But ended up basically part-time freshman year, knocking doors for a solar company, going in and trying to make those deals. And it came to the end of the year, end of freshman year, and one of the guys had reached out to me and said, "Hey, if you want to come down to Charleston, South Carolina for the summer, we'll actually pay your rent. You can live there for free." I was like, well,
cool.
What else I'd be doing here? So went down there with the intention of coming back in the fall, continuing school, but ended up, I guess, getting wrapped up in the lifestyle of Charleston, of being kind of away from home, and also making a little bit of money that I thought, hey, I didn't even know why I was here in the first place. Why go back? So I guess that single decision has kind of rolled into a lot. But one thing that I think about all that a lot often is how impactful, like, some conversations can have. Like, for example, if I never kind of talked to these two guys first day of school and then, kept talking to them, like, frankly, it's scary. I don't know where I'd be right now. So I don't know if you guys have, like, specific moments that stick out to you, like the butterfly effect, I guess, like what happens if you weren't here to talk to this person. But I think about that, like, a lot personally.
Yeah, that's a very relatable story for me. Basically, yeah, I mean, and a lot of guys in the solar industry and in sales in general would probably have similar stories as well. But in my case, I'll kind of reiterate this. I got connected into the industry by getting on a virtual job fair that the university was offering. So I was going to the University of Georgia at the time, and I was just like, essentially was looking for internships for the summer. I was trying to do my due diligence, and I saw this. Oh man, I think it was on like the Terry College of Business newsletter. There was a little box that says, "Hey, virtual job fair. You can hop on and talk to employers." It was like you hopped on, and there was a big menu, and then you could click on ones you're interested in, and then you would type like you would chat type them, and then they would send you a Zoom link, and you would hop on Zoom with them. So if I hadn't done that, and I remember that it was at like 3 p.m. that day, and I had just came home from classes, and I very heavily considered just skipping it because it wasn't like a proper job fair. I was kind of tired, and I was laying in bed like, dang, do I really want to get on this thing? Not really. But I was like, all right, screw it. I threw on my blazer and a button-up shirt, and I hopped on. And then boom, now I started selling solar. And then just like you, the summer kind of rolled along. And then by the time fall rolled back around, I did go back to school briefly for like 2-3 weeks. But I was sitting there building up solar designs in the classroom. And I was like, dang, like what am I doing here? So I dropped out. But yeah, it was the butterfly effect, right? It's like, had I not clicked on the Terry College of Business email to learn about the job fair, or had I not hopped on, or had I not clicked on the solar company, had I just clicked on a big, tech firm instead, like where would I be? Shoot, I don't know. I wouldn't be here, that's for sure.
Maybe you were just predestined to do that, and you were always going to click on that link, though.
Well, that's a whole philosophical.
That's a great question.
Argument there.
Yeah. I would say for me, I think there's a couple events that probably had a similar effect. Number one, going to Georgia Southern instead of College of Charleston, which is where I was going to go. I visited there and even put the housing deposit down, or the dorm deposit. And then I didn't get as much scholarship money as I had hoped. And I was like, screw it. I'm just going to go to Southern for free, basically, because of the Hope scholarship. And then secondly, when I decided to do that, my dad was like, hey, I mean, you're going to Georgia Southern. If you don't get all A's, you're not even trying, and I'm not going to pay for your school. I don't know if he actually meant that, but I think that made me just, all right, I'm going to actually try a little bit and get good grades. And I did that ever since. And then the last one was joining a fraternity and probably meeting Ben Moser, who used to be the fraternity president, and then maybe even playing beer pong with Patrick Fernandez, because I think he helped get me in there. So those were some, and then once I joined, I think that really changed my trajectory in terms of my life and college experience. And I don't think if I did not join a fraternity, I don't think I would have ended up joining all the finance clubs and the accounting clubs, and that's really what helped me get my internships. And my first internship was from a fraternity brother's dad who was looking for an intern, and I think that really helped me out on my resume as well. So, yeah. And now here we are. I'm about to start working in September.
Yeah, we could. We talked last episode about the idea you brought up about writing 3 books.
So, Brian, from that dropout moment to doing solar in the summer, how did you get to where you are now, and what do you got going on now?
Well, funny enough, I'm doing solar a little bit right now again.
Okay.
I thought I was out of it, but I'm back in.
Why'd you go back in?
What?
Why'd you stop doing it and now you're back in?
Yep. So that's kind of the past year has been very interesting. I guess past year and a half. So I gone in the summer. Didn't go back to school. Don't regret it in the very least. It was great. Ended up being like that summer, really getting a lease in Charleston, in downtown Charleston. If you're about to go to college in Charleston, you probably have an idea what that city's like. Like, so here I am, just this 19-year-old, just living downtown in arguably one of the best cities for young people in the country. If you can make a top 10 list or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was great. Learned a lot from there, met a lot of people, and that's a great experience. Just like being able to like connect with people a lot older and a lot more, I guess, wealthy than yourself at that age. But essentially, I stayed in solar, worked through there for the summer, then to the fall. Come around to, I guess, early 2023, into a few months. It's, I guess, a long story. A couple of things. It just wasn't going the way I guess I called it for.
He's not laughing at you. Don't worry. You had a little blooper.
Oh shit.
Sorry,
and yeah, it just things weren't going the way I planned. I guess in solar. I mean, part of it was probably under my control. Part of it wasn't. There's some external factors, but basically, decided it wasn't the move. So I hit up a friend of mine who I met freshman year of college, who actually moved into an apartment with those 2 guys I mentioned previously, which funny enough, again, it's like everything is from these like 2 guys, just this web. And the story how he even got in that apartment is crazy, like the chances of that. But he was a very, very successful guy. Very, like, I could tell when I first met him, like his mindset was just super sharp. And I saw, on Snap, on Instagram, he's doing pretty well, has some success in just the real estate space. I was just a young guy, young investor doing his thing. So I had given him a call, or I texted him, like, hey man, like, want to meet up? Let's get some lunch. Like, want to reconnect. And at first, like, he didn't really like respond to me, which was interesting. And I was like, huh, like, did he like forget or did he not respond? And come to find out, he was almost like testing me, which was interesting because like I didn't know this until he like told me down the line. Like, he's like, man, like the reason I sat down with you and got lunch with you was because you followed up with me. You were diligent. He's like, a lot of people see that I'm successful, see I'm doing this and that. They'll hit me up once, but they're not that serious. They'll just kind of leave it. But you kept calling me, you kept texting me to the point where like, damn, like this guy's serious. Like, I'm going to meet up with him. So essentially I had met up with him and got some lunch and really spent a whole weekend down there in Georgia and really got kind of close with him again. And from there I made the choice, another choice, like, hey, done with solar, either I make this work or I don't. That's where that kind of pivot came in. And since then, well, yeah, that's kind of a good chunk of that. But
yeah, well, I mean, that's a great life lesson there in your career or just in life in general, following up and just keep pegging at it, and then eventually good things are going to happen. So what he was doing real estate, is that what you said?
Yeah. So He just as an investor, which is like a very, very wide term. I mean, he was
Yeah.
big. He was big. He got me into the idea of like the whole like wholesaling game, kind of on that side of
Okay. Okay.
things. I'm not sure how
You
kind of
want to
hit you.
explain that for the audience? Wholesaling real estate.
Yeah. So in simple terms, it's basically like reselling a property. So if I go to a
Mm-hmm.
homeowner down the street and I say I'll give you $80,000 for it, I get a contract with him.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go to an investor, let's say, who flips homes, who has rentals. I'll say, hey, I have this home under contract. I'll
Mm-hmm.
assign you the contract for $100,000. Then it's yours at closing. So there I'd make 20,000. I'd be the middleman. So it's basically finding deals, being a deal finder, and then, connecting it with those people who own real estate, things like that. But
What?
it's a very wide term, but that's a simple
Yeah.
definition.
What happens if you have the contract but you can't find anyone to buy it off you?
Mm-hmm. Well, you could back out in most contracts. If you're doing it the right way, if you're diligent enough, you have the language in the contract where you can back out.
Hmm.
Um, I know it's obviously a kind of a state thing, but that's actually the interesting thing about the topic is that some states are kind of cracking down on it now. Like,
Yeah.
funny
Right.
enough,
That
literally
makes
this
sense.
week, South Carolina has kind of passed this law to where it's hard to say. The language is different. Is it like illegal? But it's more so like very, you have to do it a different way now, the way I understand it. So it's like, it's a very kind of nuanced thing. Some people are very with it. Some people are very
Mm-hmm.
against it.
Yeah.
In reality, I'd say no matter what, like, it gives people more freedom. So that's why I kind of like am very like with it. But it's a very interesting topic and people have very strong opinions sometimes about it.
So say you get it under contract with a seller and you find a buyer
Mhm.
and then you send over the contract to the buyer and he's about to buy it but the seller's like, I thought you were going to buy it, I don't want this guy buying my property. Does that ever happen?
It can happen. That's why you really want to kind of set the expectations right. So you want to
Hmm.
use, and I never like, you always want to be very honest. You want to be very straightforward, but there's certain ways you can word things to where you can say that exact thing scenario without actually saying it. So you can say, oh, like, we have my partners, or we have, you always usually have that language in the contract and things like that to where you can tee it up to where, like, if it happens, you want to, it's very important in setting expectations. We know that just in sales in general, is just being very,
Hmm.
communication's everything. So
Hmm.
that can happen, but usually the way it works is there's a lot of ways to kind of, either set that up front, expectations, or even if that does come up, like, ways around that. So, but that's a great question.
Yeah, so how long did you do that for and how did it work out for you?
Yep. So I started doing that in at some point like middle of 2023.
All
And
right.
there's a lot because that just real estate in general and real estate, like even different topics in real estate, like it's a huge topic. So there's a lot of education there. What I
Hmm.
found for myself and then others that I've either helped or my friend has helped, like a lot of people get stuck in that like analysis mode because there's so much information, there's so much to just take in that you
Hmm.
get in this false thinking of like, I need to know every single little piece about it to kind of
Hmm.
start doing it. And in reality, action is the most important. You got to take some action. You don't want to have it just this theory in your mind. And that's one thing that I'm thankful I did is I made my analysis period very short to where I kind of started getting into it. So I started doing that. I ended up finding a guy to kind of work with part time in Charleston to kind of get more knowledge and kind of get my feet in the door in that way. Um, and then ended up actually last year, late 2023, moving in with that same friend in Savannah. So since then, I mean, it's been good. I've learned a ton, and I always want to be very active in some way in real estate. That's something I've very much learned. Maybe not
Hmm.
necessarily in the wholesaling game, but there's just so many different avenues you can take to, because real estate's just a great thing, I think, because it builds like three super, super important skill sets can really be applied to anything. That's networking, sales, and damn, what was the third one?
Like investing.
Close. It builds wealth. So you're building wealth while networking, while doing sales. So it's like these
Hmm.
very like kind of, I guess, intricate things. I think what I'm missing, but it's a great space to be in. And I've taken, I guess, it's not really my full time focus anymore.
Hmm.
Um, Trying to kind of build cash other ways and kind of make it work, but it's a great thing. And I think anyone should kind of get into it if they want to launch, if you will.
Would you say you'd be pretty keen on what to look out for and how to go about buying your first personal investment property now because of that experience that you had?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd say I have a lot more perspective than most people. Still, like, again, even buying an investment property, your first property can very, very intricate, I guess, very, very detailed, which it can be, it can not. Fortunately, I have a lot of connections and friends who are way, way more knowledgeable than me. So I always can call someone up and be like, hey, like, is this a good deal? What should I do with this? And I even have people that express to me like, hey, like, if you find a deal, like, I'll partner with you. So that's the importance of having people that will like want to give to you because you're either providing them value or just they like you for whatever reason, right? So you having those people, I have people that now like say, hey, like, when you want to put some money in properties, like, let's just partner and I'll give you 50%. Typically I'll give you 10%, but because it's you, because of this XYZ, I would want to kind of partner with you in that way. So yes, awesome. I could probably have more experience, but there's plenty, like I said, plenty of angles you can take to even just one property as a whole.
What would you say is the most lucrative or the best way to go about real estate investing in terms of like your experience and, like you said, the people around you that are doing pretty good in that? Like, what are they doing? Are they buying old properties, renovating them in decent areas, or renting, Airbnb, stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the cool thing is I know several people that do several different things, and that's kind of the beauty of it is there's so many angles to real estate, and you can have people in your corner that are kind of experts at each. Right now, I'd say I have a probably a good percentage that would be like the buy and hold, and then even wholesaling as well can be a great combination to where you can maybe be on the hunt for wholesaling deals, but one comes across and you're like, man, this one would be a great Airbnb. This one would be a great, long-term rental where you can cherry pick certain ones. Okay, this would be because of this interest rate, because I got it this way, because I don't have to, take a loan out. It's a creative deal because of this and that. Like I have my friend Savannah, I mean, he's got an Airbnb that he's actually launching probably this week or next week, funny enough, that's going to make him $5,000 to $7,000 a month because it's in the right area. And it's what he kind of created. So it's really interesting in that way. And location as well is a big thing in real estate. I mean, you got to have certain areas. I mean, there's, like I said, a lot of factors, which makes it kind of fun, I guess.
So it's kind of about developing all those arrows in the quiver to where you get a pretty diverse skill set, and then it's almost like it almost becomes hard to fail because you have a lot of different legs to stand on.
And I'd say it's a double-edged sword. You got to have some balance because I think because there's the whole thing where it's like you don't want to be like the master of everything. You want to kind of have some focus, but at the same time, if you're in real estate, like I know people like my good friend who is like versed on almost every possible like exit strategy for a property. So like wholesale, lease option, short-term rental, long-term rental, so if he comes across something like it's a good deal, he'll know what to do with it. Whereas other people that only wholesale, or you have a lot of people that are in this kind of, I guess I'd say old school mindset where they only, buy long-term rentals through bank loans and they're putting 20-30% down when they realize like, hey, like if they knew kind of, I guess, I don't want to say modern, they're not modern strategies, but just more like creative strategies, they could be getting a lot more value out of a property. So it's having focus, but also knowing like, options that are there, I would say is very important.
Do you know, so you said long-term rentals by bank loans. Are there any other ways people are financing properties?
Yeah. So the biggest way that I personally kind of become hip to, because I think most people don't know about it unless they're in the space, but it's becoming a lot more mainstream now. It would just be creative finance. So one of the biggest faces in that people might recognize would be like Pace Morby. A friend of mine actually had him on his podcast, funny enough, which is awesome. His whole like community he has called Sub 2, his whole like notion is like, hey, like you don't have to have cash to buy real estate. Like you can do it through creative means. One of his community name and what he's kind of known for is Subject 2, which that is about you buy properties by essentially like assuming someone's mortgage. So if I go to a seller who there's different examples who might be in foreclosure, for example, instead of saying like, hey, like I'll give you cash, or I will, do this or that. You could say, hey, like, I will take over your mortgage and give you a monthly payment towards your house. And essentially you can get into this house that instead of putting, 20% down, that whole 40, 50K, you're in it for, you can technically get in for nothing, really. I mean, if you negotiate it, that's the beauty of it. If you negotiate these deals, you can get them for essentially free. And it's kind of crazy how it works. But once your mind is open to those possibilities, you're like, damn, like, what can I do with this? You know what I mean? So those are some big, that's just like a tip of the iceberg, but that's just one example of like ways people are doing things now that some people just aren't.
So would you say creative finance is kind of an umbrella term for all these different avenues that you might not think of?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Like some are more mainstream than others. Like I think a lot of people have heard of like maybe owner or seller financing, which is just the act of like anything like you'd finance a car. Like you can go to a seller and be like, hey, like I'll give you it. In that example, have to be no mortgage. So say you have a tired landlord who's owned a house for 30 years, he's paid off a mortgage. He's kind of old. His wife wants to retire. Say, hey, I'll give you, $5,000 down and I'll pay you, $1,000 a month for your house. You take it or he doesn't have to take it. You know what I mean? But that's just one example. That's more mainstream. You have, wrap deals and lease options, things like that. But it's a rabbit hole. It's very interesting.
Yeah. For wholesaling, because I've seen a good bit of those clips on TikTok or whatever. I mean, you don't have to personally, but could you put like a number as to what, or an average of what people can make if they like went full wholesaling real estate?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of variables there. I know guys that are making, quite literally like, hundreds of thousands a month doing that. But there's a lot of factors. I mean, yeah, you can definitely make a lot. It's not as simple as I think I might, or definitely like, certain gurus will make it sound. It's not as easy, but certainly if you're the kind of person in business, has that mindset, has that hustle, has the ability to make things happen, good at communication, then absolutely you can make it work. But it's hard to put an exact figure on that. Like I said, I know guys that are doing millions. I know guys that are doing, not doing so well. So it all kind of varies. But that's something that real estate as a whole, I'm going to be getting back to very soon, kind of more full time.
Okay. So what do you do now? Why'd you come back to solar?
Mm-hmm. So I moved down to Savannah end of last year with the thought of like going full time in wholesaling, that was my vision. That was my goal. I guess that was an interesting choice. It certainly could have worked. I learned a lot of lessons through that, which is interesting. I'd say my skills got so much better, but unfortunately, I lost a lot of money doing it, whether it's like, hey, like this marketing source is going to work. Like I thought this was going to work. Ended up being the point where like, I wanted something to kind of build off of before I got back into it. So I was doing there for a couple months, just trying this, trying that, which was great to kind of reflect on. Ended up, a good friend of mine ended up hitting me up, who we both know in solar, who was one of my best friends who I live with in Charleston. He was starting this like kind of startup company, this like AI company, which has always been something super interesting to me. He was one of the first people that introduced me to ChatGPT when it just started, like, yo, you gotta check this out. We all thought he's like crazy, like, what is this thing? He hit me up because he had started kind of playing around with this different softwares and business like that. And he's like, hey man, obviously you know what you're doing. Like, we'd love for you to come up in Charleston for the month and kind of grind this out with me. So I gone up there with him. Kind of we starting to build that up now and kind of, getting that going to where it needs to be. And then he said, hey man, funny enough, I'm actually going back up north to sell some solar. If you don't hate the idea. He sold me. He said, come with me. So here I am back now, singing some solar. And I'd say arguably a lot better market, a lot better, I guess, vehicle to kind of make it work. So who knows where it'll go. I plan on doing it for a bit. I think it's a great way, and as Spun will say as well, to kind of, make some money. So.
Yeah, solar is, that's the thing. It's because for me, I also had like a brief hiatus from solar, try out a couple things. Now
you could relate a lot. We were talking the other day.
Yeah,
same type of thing, was it?
Yeah, it's like with the skill set that we have, of course, a lot of our skills can translate to other industries, but just due to the easy plug and play nature of the solar industry, we can throw a dart on a map of the United States and go really anywhere and find a company. You know, it's not hard to get a job as an independent contracting 1099 solar sales rep. You just hit up the guy, say, "Hey, I've been doing this for a little while. Onboard me and let me come sell your stuff," and you're rolling. And then the connection that he had a connection to someone who I knew, and then now we're all here together. But for the both of us, like basically what we're doing now is just using it as a vehicle to pass some time during the summer, sure, but also, you know, stack up some capital, just get back out there in the field a little bit. I did have a little bit of nostalgia. Of course, you know, grass is always green on the other side type of thing, but, you know, being out in the field, sitting down in homes, as someone who sets and closes, you know, going in the home, helping them out, lowering their power bill, getting a hug on the way out, and then coming back a month later and looking at the glass on the roof. It's a sick feeling. But I know that I can, and Brian knows this as well. We can always tap in and out of it as we need to where it's not a thing where it's like we're signing an employment agreement to where we have to be with this one company, and then we're worried about, you know, all negotiating all these benefits, and, oh, what if I lose my health insurance? Oh, but what if I want to come back and I want to work for this other company? We're young, so we can travel still. We're flexible. We can move. We can live in a little Airbnb in a small town in Missouri, and make it happen. And also, it's cool. Like, this type of lifestyle it's kind of cool in a sense. You know, we get to live with essentially our friends for a little bit and sell some solar together. We've met a ton of people. Like, I would say a really good chunk of the what will be lifetime connections I have come from the solar industry. Me and Brian have gotten along really well. And I met you 2-3 weeks ago when I first got back up here. Yeah. But it's like it's a very fluid way to go about things. And a lot of times, you know, some, you know, 45-year-old, you know, relative, or, you know, maybe someone who's not so familiar with how sales and entrepreneurship works, they might ask me like, "Oh, what do you do?" It's like, "Oh yeah, I'm selling solar right now, doing it for the summer." It's like, "Oh, well, what do you do full time?" It's like, "Well, that's a good question." And of course, you do want some consistency in your life, but given that we have the skill set of sales and then solar as the vehicle to pair with it, of course, it doesn't have to be solar; it can be anything. It allows for a lot of freedom from our part in terms of where we can live, how we want to live, what timelines we want to work on, where we want to go, and it's cool, and it's cool for sure. So it's definitely something that college couldn't have taught me, or that, you know, high school didn't teach me, and I did not expect to be such a quote unquote nomad when I was growing up. But you know, here we are. So yeah, me and him had a solar called my name again this summer, just like it did for him after we both had a hiatus.
That's crazy.
But it all plays into an overall strategy that's very sound, I guess.
I mean, you got to be able to sell no matter what industry you're in. You got to be able to sell whether it is a product, service, or yourself, whether it's in an interview or with a big client, big company.
Oh,
yeah. And especially as money gets tight, which, guys, it is, newsflash, money's getting tight real quick, and they're going to start cutting people, especially if you work in corporate America. You got to be able to bring value to the company, and that literally means bring in money and bring in jobs and bring in clients. Or whether it's sales, you got to be bringing in sales. But Brian, I want to ask you, if you had to describe the lifestyle of solar, how would you describe it? And like, what does your routine look like? Or your daily?
I think Esteban pretty much nailed it. It's like I said, you can do it different ways, but nomadic is a good word. And I think that's what draws, I can only speak for myself, like, is the freedom of that, like kind of the choice to where, you know, what we do is, you know, very reliant on yourself. Like, you go get it, you go make it happen. You can work when you want, you level up, you become better. And like you were saying, like, you bring value, you know, one way or another. So solar is a interesting space. Certainly those that in it, you know, can share similar stories, but I think it's something that super, super glad I've gotten into.
Yeah, you're a good example of someone who's taking advantage of the flexibility because you're working on this AI business. Like Brian will be in here at this desk during the day on his laptop, and then maybe in the evening he can go out and hit some hood, neighborhood, not like bad hood, and
Nice.
and yeah, it's we don't have we don't have a set schedule, we don't have set hours or anything.
Right.
We also don't have the base salary to go along with that. But, that's part of the risk we take. And, just like we talked about earlier, it's all about time in. I'm about to knock this thing over again. Oh, my God. Time in and output out, right? So as long as we can be diligent enough to put in the amount of time that we need to more or less statistically guarantee the results that we want, then we'll be fine. We just don't have the umbrella of a guaranteed paycheck baked into an employment agreement to keep us sane. And sometimes we do go a little bit insane, but that's the solar coaster, right? You're always riding on it. You got really high highs and some really low lows, but it's good. I would want to ask you just a little bit more about what you've learned when it comes to your AI business. What have you learned in terms of like working off your computer, working in a very modern technology focused startup? Like, what has that been like?
It's been amazing and really, really eye opening as well. Because it's funny because you talk about the freedom of solar, and there's like tiers to it, I'd say, right? Because you have like your, whatever, you're tied to this place, the schedule. You have solar where it's like, okay, you can kind of move around, you can work when you want. Then you have this top tier, which is like, I can work from my computer. So I don't have to knock doors. I don't have to be in people's homes. Right. I can be, in Colombia or in Thailand or in Africa, and I can do the same thing. And I think that's a goal I think a lot of people share now, and I'm sure you guys probably do as well, and kind of getting that going. So it's the combination of like, again, always just sharpening the sword with sales and getting into a new space that I wasn't too hip about at first, and kind of getting the ropes there. Cause I mean, like you were saying, Danny, like people are getting replaced, money's getting tight. And if you're not using, if you're not adapting with the times, if you're not, using AI to an extent, I think at some point you're cooked. It's just simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, do y'all see a different efficacy rate in terms of it being in person, door to door versus virtual?
You could probably
put so I've done both, and it's just different. With door to door, it's like you get less at bats. You don't have to
drive as much, so you can get more calls technically.
Right? Yeah, because when you're doing virtual, you might have a list that you're manually dialing, or if you're efficient, you're on a power dialer where you're dialing multiple numbers at once, and it's of course for every pickup, the odds of that converting into an install are going to be a lot lower than every door knock, right? Because when you're knocking the door, you're there, you're in front of them, and a lot of people do appreciate that. I've had a lot of people who I've sold solar systems in person who have told me like, "Hey, I'm really doing this because of you. You helped me out. I liked that you were here. You always came back when we needed anything." And there's always that type of customer. Whereas when you're doing it virtually, it's kind of like fishing with a net instead of fishing with a fishing line. Because with the doors, you're casting the line on every door. But when you're selling virtually, you're just throwing out a massive net, and if your systems are set up in place, which is very, very important with really any online business, but especially with virtual sales teams, systems are everything, right? How are the leads? How often are they coming in? How efficient are we at making the most out of each individual lead? How is the install operations on the ground? How is our training, our management, our leadership structure, all of that is super important when you're doing that kind of business. And I'm sure that you're seeing that now personally, having to develop those systems in an online business yourself. So yeah, to kind of answer that question, it's just different. And the analogy I would label it with is fishing with a line versus fishing with a net is kind of the approach there. And I definitely do hope to, in the near future, go back to selling some virtual solar deals as well. Hopefully in a pretty dope place.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Brian, where are you heading? What do you want your future to look like?
That's a great question. Something I've thought about a lot recently.
Yeah.
I guess if we could segment it, like let's start with like the next 3 to 5 years, and then you could do 5 years beyond.
Yeah. Man, I was thinking like 1 year. Now you're thinking like give me decades.
Oh yeah, whatever's most relevant.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I I probably do have like a notebook or a note somewhere that has like this like 5, 10 year, 20 year.
Nice.
I couldn't tell you the details off the top of my head, but it's good to have that. I mean, it's good to obviously know where you're going and be very very directed, very intentional of what you're doing now to get to that point. In terms of the near future, because I've kind of explained or kind of talked about directly or indirectly, like my life over the past couple of years has been very like a roller coaster, or as just something where it's like it hasn't been like, okay, I knew 3 years ago I'd be sitting in Missouri selling solar again. No, I was like, okay, well, I did this, cool. I did this, cool. I learned this, cool. So being adaptive, I think it's very important. I think it's good to have a plan, 100%, and you got to stick to it. But if you need to tweak it, like don't be afraid to. So in just terms of the near future, like we were saying, like using the solar opportunity to obviously just get better in business, get better as just in sales, and using that as a vehicle to, really move towards the next steps, which to me is, like I was saying, kind of building up this AI business, making it a great just engine for, getting in that technology, building some almost passive income as close as you can get. And then leveraging all this together with creating wealth through real estate and creating those assets and network through that. So
what's your AI business?
Yeah, so it's company AI, and I can't take complete credit for it. My partner Logan, he had kind of gotten things started and really kind of brought me into it. But it's we have a couple of things we do with it. The main, I guess, product we have is a conversational AI, which when I first heard it, just blew my mind. It's essentially, there's a couple of them out there, but we use the software to basically have conversations with people like we do for sales, things like that. And the beauty of it is that we've been able to tap into different industries, whether it actually is solar, like real estate agents, like life insurance. I think we had the funny one was like a water heater company in Canada. Apparently, like in Ontario, like 70% of people like rent their water. So in this example, they're using this AI to like do their outreach, to call people, to set appointments. And there's a lot of different uses for it. Essentially, it's where, I see things are going. The scary part is like, today's the worst it'll ever be. I've seen it change in 6 months. It's only getting better from here. I wouldn't be surprised if in a year or less than 2 years, it's making like full on sales calls, full on closing, which is kind of the scary thing, but it's also really exciting because what can you do with it? So I think getting into this niche early, and really developing that and being hopefully a really key player in that space, and you're set up, you're good.
So do you have like a software developer or a coder that's developing this product?
So it's through an existing software. It's called Air AI. You may have seen the ads for it. I'm not too sure, but the cool thing with that is we are probably one of, I don't know the exact number, very few license holders of this, because they stopped actually at this point in time selling. They capped the amount of people that have license for this. I want to say it's pretty low. I don't know the exact number. I don't want to missay it, but so we had initially purchased the license, and then have access to that and access to those tools to then resell it, to give people access. People pay us quite literally thousands of dollars to either get access to the software, and then above that, like build it out for them and get it pertain to their specific niche and situation. So we're able to build out prompts, whether it's making outbound calling, whether it receives inbound calls, and it really solves a lot of problems that most businesses don't always realize they have. With people, we talked to a guy the other day who was going to use it for a lot of his calls, and he didn't realize until we really talked him through it, like he's spending like so much time every week. He's like this manager position training guys, like literally hours a week, a month, like training new people. Like, people quit, people do this and that. We can come in and say, hey, this thing works if you want it to 24 hours a day. You don't have to train it. You just tell us what you want it to say, how you want it to act, and we'll make it for you. So it's one example of a lot, but the possibilities and the scalability, and like I said, today's the worst it'll ever be. So it's only getting better. And I think, being able to understand next technology, and the people that we talk to that are open-minded, or the ability to take advantage of it now, are going to set themselves, miles apart from those who don't.
Where are you finding your potential clients?
We've got a bunch of different ways. I don't necessarily lead that part myself. We find people through, mutual business connects that maybe me and Esteban would know, or other people from our different industries in the past. Like I said, I know people in real estate. He knows people in solar, different things that have branched off from solar. He has a team of people now that actually go out and look for possible clients, whether that's, through social media, whether that's through different kind of campaigns that are help ran. But that's a process that we're kind of evolving and kind of playing with, but it's interesting kind of how that can all play together, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know much about this, but I assume there's probably other similar products. So what do y'all sell? Like, why go with you guys instead of another AI prompt product out there?
Yeah. Well, the cool thing is that there's not many people that do this now. Certainly, there are some players out there that I don't know about, but we are here. We are very, very invested in this. It really just depends on what you're looking for. I mean, we have different approaches. We have a team behind us that is very competent, that knows what they're doing, because we're not in this ourselves. I mean, we become very knowledgeable to this stuff, but we have a whole team that when things get crazy, hey, y'all build it out, y'all take care of it. So it really just depends on the people, what they need, what they're looking for. I think this has the potential to people kind of don't know how to sell it, because that's the biggest thing we found is that when people that also hold this license are also in the space, it's just the reality of it. A lot of them are very like techie guys. They're very like just obsessed with just the idea of the software. What can it do? What this and that, but they don't want to sell it. When it comes to actually selling it, they're like, I don't want to do that. That's not my thing. I like how it works. So for us to be different, we've been in sales all our lives. It's all we do. That's the easy part for us. We don't mind selling this stuff. It's the building out that we still have to learn. And that's why we have people for that. So it's knowing, who you have, what strengths you have. Exactly. Yeah. So that's something that's obviously very important that plays there.
Yeah. Your mastermind group, as Napoleon Hill says.
So how would you personally, well, I guess, it doesn't necessarily have to be with that venture specifically, but over to kind of go back to like your near future here over the next year or so, if all went well, how would things shape up professionally? And then how would you tie that into just your lifestyle, where you live, who you're around, that type of thing?
Yeah, that's really the thing. I think it's crazy because talk about like perspective and stuff. Like I think looking in the near future, like I think I have a lot in mind, and it's like, over the next year, like hopefully this summer is going to go well, which I know it will. And then moving into next year, I really hope to be a lot more on the go. So like you said, we've both been to like South America, different parts. And like, that's heavily on my radar. Getting down there and being able to kind of like travel and still work and still develop. There's a lot to do. I mean, even like traveling, like there's a lot to build out with the business and obviously meet more people, gotta make more money, learn new skills. It was funny. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking like, what does like a perfect man look like? We were just talking, just like this random like conversation. We're like, what would a perfect man be able to do?
Jesus Christ.
That's true. Yeah, can't beat that. But if you're talking about below that, like close you can get, like what does this man do? And we were talking like, what are some like random skills we'd want to have? And I was like, well, I don't know. I want to fly a helicopter. I want to scuba dive. I want to do like when you have, that's the beauty about having like the freedom and money as well, is like you can do these things. So I'm curious, what are some things that you guys would want to get into that's like maybe can be random, maybe not, but like skills you'd want to get into that would like, or just,
that's kind of, we literally just had a podcast about that.
Yeah. We talked about that on the last episode.
Yeah.
But I mean, to answer, that's kind of a cool question. Like, what would a perfect man look like? I would say, a lot of it comes down to just the way that this might sound generic, but like, how does he communicate and interact with others? And how does he utilize, what's been given to him, whether it's his skills, his circumstances, his connections, the best to provide the most value as possible into the world. A lot of very successful men will say, hey, I'm successful because I took a step back and just really took time to find out how can I provide the most value possible. And you can get into a lot of discussions as to, what is the role of a man, what do we need to do for our loved ones and our families and for the world. But yeah, if a guy can provide a lot of value into the world and communicate with people very well and be likable in that way, and then also have the money to go scuba diving and go really enjoy the time that he's had on this earth, I guess that's how I would answer that question just right off the dome. But if, obviously if I built the whole to use a video game reference, the whole my player, like the whole avatar, I would probably take a lot of time to really iron out.
Yeah. My answer is probably you hit probably most of the points that I would speak on. Like, it's like you asked about what skills would a perfect guy or man have. Well, everyone's given different skills and has different talents, and we're all built differently. And I think a perfect man, like us once said, would be using what's given to him to the very best of his ability to provide the most value to everyone around him and be the best he can be as it relates to the present, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, and not only just for himself, but for his family, and then for his friends, and then broader community as a whole. And then I think a perfect man would have characteristics such as being humble, noble, caring, but
Mm-hmm.
also be strong enough to fend off the devil and the monsters away, um, and be able to push back when the time comes. So yeah, you'd have to flesh that out a lot, but it depends on who you are and really just being the best version of yourself, I think.
Brian, would you say that as you were thinking of what you want to do, with your future, and as you brainstorm for like your plans going forward, that question kind of creeps into your head a good bit in terms of like, well, like, would you say that you use becoming the perfect man uh, as sort of like a filter when it comes to determining what your next moves are?
I guess in a way, yeah, I think it's important I'm not the first person to say this, but like envisioning like that perfect version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like a friend of mine who got me hip to this idea, this exercise, if you will. He called it I think it was the coffee shop method, where essentially like it can be used for certain ways, whether it's like good or bad, but essentially you're maybe you got to like envision yourself in your mind, like, you're sitting in a coffee shop and a guy walks in and it's like the perfect version of you. Right. And it's like, what is he dressed like? What does he sound like? What does, people think of him? Right. And you just basically like this exercise. And
what does he order?
Exactly. What would he order? How does he talk to the barista? Everything. But it's a pretty thorough thing. And I couldn't explain it right on here, but essentially like that exercise with yourself, like you're having a conversation with this person. And the thought is like, you're kind of, yeah, it's pretty deep, but I think that's something that a lot of people should have in mind, but in a good sense, in a positive manner, right? Not it's like, oh, I'll never be this guy. It's like, well, I'll hope that I get as close as I can to this guy. And I'm going to have, like you say, like a purpose, and you're using what you have, the right way to get there. So
that's crazy. What that sounds to me is kind of a concretization of what your relationship with God should be like. Like that's literally who Jesus was. It's the perfect man. And having that relationship, talking to that person, which is your untapped full potential, and realizing that you're not there now, but you can be doing things every day in order to get to that. And that's kind of what prayer is supposed to be. And this idea of the perfect man, which was Jesus, it's like, well, how do you become Jesus? Well, you bear your cross on your shoulder and you walk uphill, and I think in our lives, I think the best thing we can do is bear the heaviest burden we possibly can and take the most responsibility for the most amount of things that we possibly can and do what is difficult. And then we will become that untapped potential that you were talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty deep.
Yeah.
That's well said.
Yeah. I mean, there's always the whole, you're always playing a game in your head in terms of how much, I don't want to use the word balance because I think that word is overused sometimes, but the balance between how much do I do for myself and how much do I do for others? How long do I carry that cross before I put it down? And, I guess a lot of these questions will go unanswered by us for a very long time. And it might not be until we're 80 years old that we truly discover, how we should have lived our lives as a young man. But, that's a part of the journey, right? And where I've gotten a lot of peace, I guess for lack of a better term, and a lot of just confidence in what I'm doing day to day is in accepting the fact that I might not be making the best move at every single second of the day. I'm still going to have my mistakes, and I'm still going to look back on things with a ridiculous amount of hindsight and be like, dang, I should have done this differently, should have done that differently. I should have been more selfless here, should have been more selfish there. But one thing I would want, people who can learn from me, or, maybe my future children to really understand is that we don't need certainty. We don't need, certainty is a luxury that very few people will have. And if you can be comfortable living without it, then that's when and a lot of this can come back to what we've talked about with Marcus Aurelius, right? Setting expectations. If you set expectations for everything, whenever they're not met, you're going to be very distraught. Whereas when you go into things with a bit more of an open mind, and you're comfortable with that uncertainty, and you're certain that the uncertain is good for you, then you'll live pretty well.
Yeah, and I think the best way to take the first baby steps towards that potential is just, I'm sure we could all write down 10 things that we do every single day, whether it be TikTok, alcohol, porn, whatever, that we know that are bad for us. And if we stop doing, we would be that much better. And just doing what's right in front of you, and then just start taking steps forward. And then eventually you'll figure out whether or not you're going in the right direction. Then you can adjust from there.
Yeah, that was definitely quite a, I don't want to say rabbit hole, because our whole podcast is a rabbit hole, but we went into some meat right there off of that question.
But Brian, I want to know, on this topic, but a little bit more personalized, what do you want to look like? Let's say you're 40, 50-year-old, you want to have a family. What do you want to be able, what does your life want to look like now that you would think would be a good life in the future?
Well, to completely be real with you, I don't know. I mean, I think I have a somewhat of maybe an idea in my head, but that's a long time from now. I guess I'm thinking I think a lot of the way my mind is framed right now is very short term, not in a bad way, but in the fact that I'm very focused on the now. And maybe it's kind of based off what you said with not having that certainty. I don't know. I still think that's something 40, 50-year-old, I need to really sit down and take a lot of time to reflect and really kind of build that person. But I'm very certain that, whatever that looks like, I'll be very proud of that. And I will, just something that I built towards it. I'm be very, very positive on. So it'll work.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's, I'm glad you mentioned that last little nugget. As you said, whatever it's going to look like, whatever I will be at 40, 50 years old, I know I'm going to be proud of it. And I think a lot of times when you find yourself in a spot where you genuinely don't think you'll be proud of it, or maybe you're uncertain as to whether or not you'll be proud of it, then you might start getting really over analytical as to what that day is actually going to look like. But in your case, someone who isn't thinking about that too much, and you are very focused on the now. But I think that part of the reason why you have the luxury to be able to do that, and why you are just completely chill with the fact that you don't really think that far, is because you'll be fine. And a lot of knowing that your future is going to be fine is created by the track record that you've had in the short life leading up to now. So, I mean, for us, we're in our early 20s, so we don't have a huge sample size, right? But also just how do we feel on a day-to-day basis? If we take what we're doing now and we multiply it by 4 decades, it'll probably look pretty good. But it's about making sure that in the now you're doing the right things, you're feeling good about where you're going, you're getting your priorities straight. Because I mean, if you were to take your life now and multiply it by 4 decades, for those of you listening, what do you think that would look like? And I know that might be a really good thing for some people. It might be really scary, but I could say I relate in the sense that I'm also leaving it pretty open in terms of what my life is going to look like when I am that old. I do have a couple checkpoints that are like boxes I definitely want to check, but I know it'll be fine. I bet Danny, you could probably say the same.
Yeah. What does the Bible say about this? I keep going back to that. And then the prayer for wisdom. It's like, help me be able to
God
focus
grant me the
on,
serenity to accept the things I cannot
yeah,
change the
accept the
things I
things
can, the wisdom of the
yeah,
difference.
yeah, serenity prayer, exactly.
It's very relevant.
So just be able to differentiate the things that you can be working on now and you can be doing to get better, and the things that you don't really have control over, and you're just gonna have to roll with the punches. The consequence of life is suffering, and so you just got to kind of know that and just deal with it. But just keep on moving uphill, bear that
Yeah,
cross. Yeah,
it's good stuff. Well, I've got one last question for him that's completely unrelated, but Danny, anything else?
go ahead, go ahead.
So, Brian, I've gotten this from you in person, but real quick, 90 seconds. What review would you give to Medellín, Colombia from your trip?
Medellín, Colombia is. I'll tell you, I haven't traveled the whole world, but there's no way it's not top 5 cities.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
There's no way. Like that city. I've been there for a week, and the amount of like motivation and drive I had from getting like living that life, that experience for just not even a week. It was like 4 days. Just that 4-day period has probably given me enough fuel for 5 years of work. I mean, just so that's one thing that talking about goals and future. Like that's one place I would not hate being for a little or a lot of time, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you put it that way. It's that little trip just gives you so much fuel, and I felt the same way.
Do you agree, Esteban?
Oh my God, yeah.
Yep.
That week, because I mean, yeah, it was like I want to recreate that really bad.
What, coffee shops and the clubs and the girls and the.
I mean, we could do
weather.
we could do a whole Medellín rundown episode. But yeah, I mean,
We'll get on for another episode.
I will say something real quick for those of you listening who hear the word Colombia and instantly think, "Oh, passport bro just wants to go there for the girls." You have no idea. It goes way deeper than the girls. Just saying. They're like it's every second of your day is just in some way better.
Well,
I'll vouch.
That's a way to end it. Medellín, Colombia.
Yes,
It's
sir.
been real. Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. I love
Any
hearing about
closing remarks, final
what do you
thoughts,
want to
anything
say
you want
to
to
the
share?
people?
It'll be funny to reflect on this, I think, watching back on this for all of us. And great to hop on, and super excited to see where things go.
Yeah, and I do want to say this for anybody that's still listening to this point. And I'm sure you guys can relate as well. When you think back like 5-10 years ago, I kind of get a weird cringy feeling about the way that I acted and the way that I thought. And I'm sure this podcast is going to have a very similar effect. I'm going to look back 5-10 years from now and be like, I was such an idiot. Like, what the hell was I talking about? But hopefully, and I think Esteban and my goals in doing this is just to become better communicators, become more articulate, and just be able to learn and take you guys along the journey with us. So you guys don't have to listen to this podcast, but if you do, hopefully,
Yeah, you do have to actually.
You're enjoying that journey.
Yeah, I mean it's basically a little vault that we're gonna have for a while. For like, oh, how did we think at 21? Boom, there you go. And then also just becoming comfortable. I was telling Brian this in the car earlier. Like I've started to become more comfortable creating content, getting in front of a camera, editing videos, right, making thumbnails, whatever, networking with people online. Because at least for me, eventually I do want to broadcast more of my life over time, and this has been a really good segue into that.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for listening and watching. If anyone out there wants to be on the podcast and has something interesting they want to say or a cool experience or topic they want to talk about, hit us up in the comments or in the DMs. Thanks, Brian. Y'all keep it real out there. Stay safe in Illinois or Medellin or wherever you're going.
Who knows nowadays?
Wherever the dice may fall.
Yeah. All right.